Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. Today's guest and I have only known each other for a few months, but immediately found commonalities in our thinking. Lise Farquhar posted about one of my earlier episodes that she heard on Stephen Hurley's Voice Ed Radio, and we've been interacting on Twitter ever since. Welcome, Lise. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Eileen. It is really a pleasure to speak with you. I enjoy listening to your episodes so much and connect with so much of what your guests say. And just always find that it opens my mind further.
That's so awesome. And yeah, we're going to talk about opening your mind and your reflections and so forth a little bit later. So I didn't really say much of anything about who you are, what you do, where you are. So can you tell our listeners?
So I am based in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Originally, I'm Canadian, but I think I'm over half of my life now I've spent out of Canada. But it's interesting, we stay connected because I am a teacher and have the incredible privilege of spending the summers back in Canada. I have a family, and so I take my sons back there, and my husband usually joins us for part of the time as well. So we've maintained a strong connection with Canada, but one of my I actually think as I get older, it's actually a bit of a claim to fame that I have lived in 4 provinces across Canada, which is not a typical Canadian experience. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, have lived on 4 different continents across the world. So I developed itchy feet at a young age and have been very, very fortunate to scratch them really and expand my journey around the world.
Yeah, that is quite a claim to fame. Yeah, go ahead.
I teach visual art, and I've been in my role for 5 years now, but I've been in education for over 20, and originally trained in Canada and got my first work experience in Singapore, working in a Montessori school there. Mm-hmm. We then moved to the UK and lived in London. And then I got my UK qualified teacher status and worked as a primary school teacher there, teaching everything from RE to PE, religious education, to physical education. Wow. And then we moved to Cyprus, and I got into a role where I actually, because of the timing with my teaching, I got into IT. So when I went to university, I did a Bachelor of Fine Art, and I've always been doing creative work. But once I got into teaching, I obviously embedded a lot of the arts in my classroom. But I was one of those younger people who knew how to jiggle the cables on the backs of printers at a time when everybody thought that that was like miracle work. I actually got involved in delivering training to teachers in the UK in the very first versions of virtual learning and managed learning platforms. So I have a really kind of diverse teaching experience with that whole side of digital learning and all the creativity that comes with that. So I had quite a lot of experience in a number of years in that role. And it's just incredible to me that I'm kind of working towards the end part of my career and finally getting to the point where I had wanted to start and teaching visual art full time. And just about to enter a new chapter because I'm moving next year from teaching in the primary school to teaching in the secondary school. Ooh. So yeah, some serious lifelong learning going on in my world. Mm-hmm.
New challenges are always fun, and it sounds like you're really up for it. And really, it is interesting that several of my guests have said I'm sort of now getting to the place where I wanted to be, and it feels good when you get to that place.
Yes,
it's so much fun. So yeah, so that's exciting. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be working with a different set of students, although you know the challenges are different and maybe the way you approach it is different, but I know how creative you are, so it'll be interesting to see where it all goes. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, as you know, because you've listened to my podcast, the very first question I always ask my guests is, if I say the word belonging or feeling a sense of belonging, what comes to mind?
Well, I just want to give credit to you because I find it so intriguing, the diversity in responses that your guests give. It's really fascinating to me. And for me, I would say that adaptability is the key word connected to belonging. When I was young, I was extremely shy and quiet. And my parents, we moved a lot when I was young. So I was, forced to get into situations where it was new, it was unfamiliar, and it pushed me out of my little world and out of my comfort zone. And eventually, over time, I learned to adapt faster and faster. And I really absolutely love being in new situations and being able to adapt quickly so that I can gain a sense of belonging. So for me, it's all about adaptability. And the more I know it's not the same for everyone, but I just find that I really needed to be forced into that situation. I always wonder if my parents had been settled and we had remained in the same place for a period of time, whether I would be as outgoing as I am now. So I think adaptability, because the more you can adjust and read the group of people you're in and quickly understand the ways and the traditions and the context that you're in and adapt to it and embrace it, the more you will feel a sense of belonging. We've been in the UAE now for 12 years.
Wow.
And we often would travel over to Oman to go camping or to go and visit some, just different landscapes and environments.
It's beautiful there.
I'm in love with Oman. It's just such a wonderful place. And one time we crossed over the border, returning to the UAE, and we got into the Emirati border control, and you obviously have to show your passport. And the Emirati border control men said, "Welcome home" to us. And my husband and I just looked at each other like, wow, that is, it was just such a wonderful moment to, have that acknowledgement of belonging to a place where you feel you belong, by the country. So having traveled a lot, that was a really significant moment.
Yeah, there are so many different layers that I'm getting to that. You're the first guest who's mentioned adaptability. And so my first thought was, gee, chicken and egg, did the adaptability come from? And then you mentioned, well, I sometimes wonder if my parents hadn't moved around a lot, if it really would have. And then I'm thinking the layer of you're moving around so much and you're talking about adapting, understanding the culture, embracing, and then that final thought about welcome, being welcomed home, and for your husband and you to have that immediate connection to, yeah, that feels really nice. There are just so many different layers to that whole idea of adaptability that I would never have thought about. But with your story and your example, it so makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting because my two sons, they're now 11 and 13, and we really only go to Canada in the summers, and we do this massive cross Canada tour because my husband's from the West Coast and I'm from Ontario, and we spend our time between both locations, and so they don't. They go to summer camps and they have built a few friendships, but they're very short-lived and they don't maintain them over the year. But when you ask them where they are from, they say, well, I'm from Canada, even though they have spent their entire lives, really, my younger son was born here, and they belong in these two places, regardless of the fact that their sense of belonging in Canada is so completely different. But again, I think it comes down to this. They are also very adaptable children. And so they're able to roll with it. And when we travel to different places, they adapt very quickly to the environments. So they quickly, they really already have that sense that where you lay your head is home kind of thing. So they're very, we are all very quick to have a quick sense of belonging, I think, as a result of adaptability.
Yeah, and that's so important too, that you've been able to give that, gift that really to your children.
Yes.
That they do have, because there are so many third culture kids, as they, typically call them, the TCKs, who travel the world, but are from somewhere else, who really find it difficult to adapt once they're back in their home countries. And often they end up getting a job or going to college in different places other than where they would normally call home. So it's wonderful to hear that your sons already feel that sense of home, because they do understand that it's adapting, and they have that appreciation of the culture and where they're from, even though, like you said, your younger son has never really lived there other than just visiting.
Yes.
So that's really awesome. I'd love to get into more about you. And so you talked a lot about traveling, and we know that now you're in the Emirates, but I wonder if you could go a little bit deeper into some of your experiences about how you, your family, and your students feel the sense of belonging no matter where we are. So you talked about adaptability. And for somebody who doesn't really understand how that works, or hasn't really traveled very much or lived other places, how does that work for you? How did you finally come to terms with all of that so that you really enjoy it, but on top of that, you feel the sense of belonging?
One of the things, if I bring it straight away to my classroom, I teach in an international school that delivers the International Baccalaureate framework. And so international mindedness is, a big part of the mission and vision of the IB and of our school. And we're in a really unique environment, because our school is a truly international school. The diversity is absolutely incredible. There's no dominant culture, and there's no affiliation with any one country, which is, not actually the typical international school.
True.
And so I feel really fortunate to be there and teaching art, especially because in the lessons, I just am always striving to give as much choice as possible to the students so that they can make their own connections as they need to. I do encourage, and I try as often as possible to give a UAE perspective when I'm giving examples or making suggestions or trying to make connections, because that is the uniting experience for the children.
Nice.
And so if we're looking at, an example, we were looking at logo design, just as an example. So we looked at logos of, the 7 Emirates in the UAE. And so each Emirate, like a province or like a state, they have their own style of logo for promotion. And so the Abu Dhabi logo has a very traditional feel to it. It has a unique font style. And the Dubai logo is much more modern. And the logo for Ajman has these sort of castle-like fortress-style towers in it, connected to a historic building in there. And so I tried to give examples that are based locally, and then have the students engage with that, so that the Emirati students feel a sense of ownership and celebration and acknowledgement. And then the students who are new gain more information, and the ones who've been here for quite some time, they can relate and connect. And then that'll be the starting point as an example. And then they will move from that point to being able to connect with the culture that they wish to embrace. And sometimes they will go off in a direction that is unpredictable, and it's based on their friendships that they're forming.
Wow.
And so, you'll have a student who's from Mexico who is wanting to create something inspired by a pattern that you see in Poland, because their new best friend is from Poland, and they want to make connections that way. So I would say that one of the things that I do for them to feel a sense of belonging is allow them to, and not allow, promote them having as much choice as possible, so that they feel that what they are creating belongs to them, and they can truly speak to it from their perspective, and connect their interests to it.
Right. Yeah. Student agency is so important and often neglected. We talk about student choice and voice, but it's really more than that. It's not just choosing something simple. It's really feeling deeply, like you said, those friendships or those things that we connect to on a feeling basis, rather than just on, oh, I think this is what my teacher wants.
Yes.
And then choosing that, trying to please the teacher. So yeah, that whole idea of agency really is connected to belonging. It's so important. So yeah, absolutely.
I often generate a sense of chaos in my class, not a sense of chaos. I often generate
part of the
chaos in my
creative
class.
process, isn't it?
Yeah, because I will, they are often, obviously they will believe there is one right answer to things, which of course is simply not the case in art. And so when there is so much choice on offer, it can be really overwhelming to them. Which again is why I try to give guidance for them to connect to something very personal to them. But yeah, it's quite interesting to see that unravel sometimes. They're like, please just tell me. And you're like, I can't tell you because it's not within me, it's within you.
Right. Yeah. Is that a project that you do earlier in the school year or later in the school year?
Well, my teaching partner and I, Mark Ryan, he and I developed the first year that we started teaching together at Raha. We spontaneously rolled out this introduction lesson to get to know the students and to, for them to find their way at the beginning of the year, and for us as well as new art teachers to the school. And we were both new to teaching art full-time as well.
Oh, interesting.
And so we ended up developing something spontaneously that actually is something we repeated year after year. And it was so that we set the tone at the very start of the year to facilitate the students understanding that they were in the driver's seat. And so we call it the shape provocation. And each year we create these stencils. And the first year it was kind of a bit like an arrow, but kind of like a fish. And if you turn the shape in another direction, it could look like a carrot. So it was very much about your perspective. And how is your perspective when you look at a particular shape? How is it connected to your interests, your culture, or your experiences?
Wow.
And so we started the year out with this. It was kind of a provocation, really. And we would do it with all the students from grade 1 to 5. And it was such a telling activity, because depending on the way the students addressed this challenge, you could almost predict where they would be at the end of the year in terms of their progress. And so you could, they would, you'd have the kids who just straight away saw something immediately and shared it. You would see the students who sat back and looked and listened, and when you turned it a certain way, then they would spark. And then we used it as an opportunity for the students to get to know what materials were in the room and how they could access them and what their preferences were. And so you would see the students who they just wouldn't move away from a pencil and color pen or something very, very familiar that they knew they had control over. And then you would see the other students who were just wildly experimenting and layering and splashing paint. And by the end of it, the shape had disappeared from their their image.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm. So that was that's again just one of the ways of again the students developing ownership over a space so that they feel they belong straight away.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. As I mentioned in my introduction of how we met, you make a habit of reflecting on podcasts you've listened to, since you consider it, and so do I, a part of your professional development. What started you doing this, and why is it important to take time and make time and reflect? Because not, especially educators, we find difficulty finding the time and also thinking about doing it.
I've been into surfing the web for as long as it's been going, really. And early on, I would read and get into teacher blogs. And I was always just so blown away by the amount of content that people produced that was out there and how valuable it was. And I always aspired to start writing a blog. And when I taught kindergarten one year, I developed a class blog, but it was more of a communications and a celebration kind of platform. And so I just couldn't get started or sustain that practice.
Right.
And again, a couple of years ago, I have to give credit to Mark Ryan here again, where he started up a podcast and got into Twitter. And he kept saying, "Come on, Lise, like, jump on board here. What do you mean you're not listening to podcasts? And what do you mean you're not on Twitter?" And I was like, "Oh, no, not going there." And then I started to realize what a valuable opportunity it was to develop my own practice in terms of communication, developing my communication skills. I am very well known for talking too much. And the reason is because I have only fairly recently realized that I just can't process my thoughts until they are spoken aloud. And, so a lot of people, obviously, they listen, they contemplate, everyone processes in a different way. And I've just discovered that is one of the reasons I ramble so much. And so I really set myself the goal to try to become more concise in my speaking. And so when I started seeing these run and rant videos that people were producing and started to look at Twitter and how that worked, and you have this very finite amount of time where you can speak your thoughts, and trying to really condense it. I would speak for 5 minutes and think, okay, restart that again. And so I actually got into it to develop my skills in communicating in a more concise way.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I wasn't bothered with how many people saw it. And I quickly got over being concerned about being self-conscious or what have you, because I thought I am really, truly doing this for myself. And then I listened to Brian Carpenter, who does the Fresh Air at 5 podcast. And when I caught one of his episodes, I thought, this is it for me. I really value the amount of time that people put into creating content and sharing it. And I benefit so much from it. It's like consuming YouTube videos and always thinking, I must give back. I must do a how-to video. And so I thought, how do I let people know that I've listened to and acknowledged their what they've created? Ideally, I would like to write and blog about it, but at this point in my life, sitting down to write a blog on a daily basis, obviously it's possible, but I'm just not there at the moment. And so I thought, well, if I just do these, very short reflections on where the podcast took my thinking and the connections that I made with it, that's it has sort of a dual purpose. It's giving credit and showing gratitude towards what people had created and letting them know the connections that it made for me. So that was the springboard for that.
Yeah, and what's really nice is because I've been able to catch quite a few of them, is that in its own way, although you're doing it for yourself, it's professional development for others, because we get to see different ways that people are reacting, responding to what's being said within the podcast or the topic and so forth. And it really starts us thinking, gee, is that what I took away? And if not, I wonder maybe I missed something, or maybe I need to look at this again. So it's really helpful. So it's actually become another piece of my professional development, listening to what you're saying. And I know now you're very involved with listening to the Staff Room podcast that Che and Pav do, and that their topics are just so, current. Many times. And I know that you did a guest blog recently for them. So you are blogging a little bit, but yeah, having a blog and thinking about doing it regularly. I know there are weeks where, I used to do once a week. There are weeks where just spirit doesn't move me, or I'm, busy. So if you start blogging, it's difficult, but picking up the phone or taking a walk and recording your reflections while it's still fresh in your mind is much easier to do.
Yeah, and just sustaining things as well. It can be difficult. I loved what Tim Cavey did a little while ago with his, he's just always reinventing himself. I like to describe him as the Madonna of podcasters, because it's phenomenal what he has produced and all the different experiments and explorations he's done. And he did a series where he was, amplifying the voices of blogging educators. And he just had them read their blog aloud, because one of the things I find is that I don't tend to sit still. If I am on my computer, it's because I'm doing something related to school. Okay. And but when I go out walking, I love listening. Or if we're going on a long car journey, I'll be listening to things. And so I love, taking in what these people have said. And the audio format really suits me really well. So it's been good.
Yeah. Listening to podcasts is something that I just got into within the last couple of years, and in terms of education, just within the last 2 or so, because I was listening to podcasts for just my own general benefit, for interest, NPR programs and all of that. So yeah, but there are just so many educators out there who are sharing wonderful things and just their perspective, because as international educators, we sometimes get in a rut, because although we're connected to others, if we don't have that network that sort of expands outside of our local area, we're missing a lot, because there's so much that's going on in education right now.
Oh yeah. And
it's also reinforcing for us, especially this past year, and we're okay because other people are feeling the same way we are.
Exactly. Yeah, it's well, and I got listening to you because of your connection with Voice Ed Radio that Stephen Hurley produces. And again, just thinking about always striving to be open-minded. I love randomly at different times of the day just popping that on, when I'm on my way home or in the morning, and very different times of the day, and catching different things and picking up on something that I had never thought I would have an interest in, or had I wouldn't have sought out that information or to listen to those speakers. But I just love the value in that. Just sort of popping on these random things and them generating random thoughts that actually lead you to tying things up more neatly and consolidating your thinking.
Yeah, and finding out about something that you, like you said, you wouldn't normally search it out, but is really fascinating. And I miss Stephen Hurley's live shows in the morning, and I understand why he sort of had to let that go for now.
Yeah.
but there is just so much rich content on voice ed. I mean, there are other broadcasting places where you can go, but voice ed really is a place that I know a lot of educators have found connections, which is really, really awesome. And I believe that's one of the things that Stephen was hoping would happen when he started it 4.5 or 4 and it's a bit years ago. So Lise, I wanted to ask you, I can't really, this may sound strange, but I can't really call you an art teacher because you're so much more than that. So how do you describe what you do? Because there's so much to your classes. I know you're teaching in an IB school, but still, it's not easy for every teacher, even an art teacher, to look at inquiry, curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, and all of that exists in an art program, an art class, or should exist anyway, and an IB program, which is very project-based. But you take it to different levels. So describe what you do, and maybe, hit upon one or two examples of things in the past that have really sort of resonated with you, or that you had a lot of fun with and seemed to resonate with the students.
I've always described myself as a jack of all trades, master of none. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who it was in science, and I had a lab partner, and he was very, very skilled when it came to drawing and cartooning. And I remember one time I was, sketching out our ideas, because this teacher, he was just fantastic. And he would have us record our lab reports in the form of a comic strip. And so my lab partner, Nick, he always got that job because he was the star when it came to drawing. But it was me who would, I was sketching out the ideas. And I remember my teacher, Mr. Wiley, coming and saying, well, what are you doing? You're not the artist. Make sure, Nick should be doing that. And I remember thinking, well, okay, wait a minute. Like, what is an artist really?
Yeah.
And he didn't, he certainly didn't mean it in any kind of a way, but it stuck with me. And I think that it has always kind of been a little bit of, it's sort of always challenged my thinking.
Right.
And so I didn't take art in high school, not once. We had electives as soon as I don't ever remember having, distinct art classes in primary school. We had a music teacher and we did music, but art was always integrated. And I'm not one to practice, and those are the kinds of things that it takes repetition and practice to become good at drawing. Sure. And the typical viewpoint is that if you can draw a dog that looks like a dog, then you are an artist. And I didn't experience that, so I didn't ever take art in high school. But I wanted to be in the creative world and get into interior design or something like that. And anyway, did a bunch of other things before I got into doing my Bachelor of Fine Art. But I think that my experience as an art teacher really is connected to my experience as a homeroom teacher, and my general viewpoint that it's learning through the arts that offers you that opportunity to apply your thinking and learning from other areas of the curriculum into a new format. And I see the arts as a form of communication, like a language. Nice. And so when I started working in the IB, I just felt at home with it because it encouraged transdisciplinary learning. Yes. When I taught in the UK, I taught every subject, and I brought an arts-based learning approach to my teaching, but it was also partly because it was practical. You had only so many hours in the week and so much content to cover. The only way to deliver it was to interweave everything. So through geography and history and RE and maths, everything, and literacy, everything was done. And it was arts that joined it all together, really. And so I really champion that perspective, that it's learning through art, not about art.
Nice.
That is where the greatest value lies. And so in school, I'm always trying to connect to what we call the units of inquiry. So the students may have a more science-directed unit. So our grade 2s a couple of years ago, they were looking at the properties of matter and learning, being introduced to the scientific method and testing and processes and things. And so when they came into the art room, we looked at simply, how do you create secondary colors? And one thing in terms of the learning environment as the third teacher, one thing that I do is when we order supplies, I try to only ever order things in the primary colors when it comes to paint and oil pastels, especially. So that if a student says, well, I need green, then you say, well, you have what you need to make green.
Nice.
What do you need? So you're always reinforcing this. And it comes nicely into play in this unit about the properties of matter, because the students, you're only provided with the primary colors. And for this example, it was with paint. And eventually, the students we gave them a still life setup of some fruit. And it was a plate with some green grapes and, purple grapes, some green pears, and an orange. And they had to use their observation skills to create this still life drawing of the fruit on the plate. And then with blue, red, and yellow, they had to mix the colors and they had to get the exact match. And so we had them doing, setting their page up to do test strips. How much yellow do you need to mix with the blue? Do you mix the yellow first? Where do you start? How do you? So of course, when a student wants to make orange, they'll take an equal amount of things. And so again, you're sort of bringing those scientific principles of experimentation and testing into the art room and giving them this practical application of it. So that's kind of an example of a transdisciplinary unit. When they're learning about body systems, we look at figure drawing and use, those old-fashioned wooden mannequins.
Yes.
Favorite thing to use when it comes to figure drawing. But that then connects to body systems, but as well mathematics. And when it comes to sharing the learning outcome with the students, at no time do I say, okay, today we are learning to draw a figure. It's always, we are learning to use proportion or our understanding of proportion to create a figure, or, and always bringing mathematical language into it. So if you
use the vocabulary is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how many heads tall are you? So, you're talking about ratio, you're talking about fractions, you're talking about symmetry, all of these mathematical concepts in the art room. And so I really value my experience as a homeroom teacher because I'm able to bring that into the art room. And it's interesting because people who, have only ever taught art as a separate element of the curriculum, it's very difficult because the ability to flow between the different disciplines is difficult. So when I move up to secondary, one of my key aims is to try to continue that connection between the disciplines.
Yeah, that's such a refreshing perspective to look at, what we would normally consider a separate subject area where you learn to draw and paint and sculpt, and look at it as so connected and integrated with everything else. And when you're talking about an international population, obviously you're talking about students who English is a second language for them or an additional language for them. They may have quite a few languages. Yeah. And so being able to reinforce the vocabulary of the content areas that is unfamiliar to them is so important also. And not just talking about it in terms of, this is art, I'm in the art room, you're in the art room, and this is only what we're going to be doing, but looking at it from the broader perspective. I love it. I love it. Yeah,
I try and bring in the UN global goals into all of my lessons as well. And It's very interesting to see where the students take that. So I don't do a deep dive into, the number one thing that the students will ask when they see, SDG number one, no poverty, is, Miss, what is poverty? What does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
oh, so I wish that there was an opportunity to kind of go deeper with that with them, but that I think I will have the opportunity when I'm in the secondary school to go further with that, extending their understanding of that.
Sure.
But even just at a superficial level, bringing the global goals into the art room as well, again, thinking about the purpose of creating art, because for me, in the school context, that is what it's all about. They'll ask me, oh, can I, follow this video? And I'm like, at home, you've got loads of time that you can dedicate to, that side of what you want to develop yourself. But in school, I'm always trying to, again, like direct them towards to making those connections and using art as a form of communication, not simply as not simply for the aesthetics or the pleasure of it or what have you. But when you bring in the global goals as well, I just recently did some work when the students were doing a unit connected to business and ethics. And I brought up the global goals and I said, so the business that you're creating, and they were creating businesses where they were making films to share or making little products that they would sell and what have you. And I'd say, well, which one of the goals is your product connected to? And at first they were like, what are you talking about? Is this an art class? Like, why are you asking me about this? But the number of students who migrated to gender identity, and it was phenomenal. And it created this conversation in the classroom that would never have happened had I not projected the 17 goals on the board. Right. And it got them saying, oh yeah, when I want to create these little videos that appeal to boys and girls equally, because I don't like it when there's a show that my sister wants to watch, but it's only really for girls. A group of kids who wanted to create a book for, footballers. And then you have that conversation, when you create your logo, like, who is your product for, and it took them off on these tangents. And then it informed the color scheme choices that they made to make sure that they were being gender neutral, or that they were emphasizing, it's for boys and girls and following a stereotype, but with great intention. So I art teacher is my title, but I see myself as a facilitator of learning and a facilitator of creativity. And I try to avoid using the capital A artist word in my classroom. I don't say, oh, okay, with your artist hat, what do you think as my artist or what have you? I do not speak that way. So I think more of the, lowercase a for artist, where it is embedded and interwoven into everything. People who, when you say, can you, does engineering a solution to a problem, does that make you an engineer? So
yes.
Yeah. Does creating something in an artistic way make you an artist? What is an artist? I think of it as a profession. So when we have a summative assessment, I might say, as an interior designer, take this composition that you've made, think of your color scheme and what so you might have the hat of an artist on, but very much as a profession. Whereas on a daily basis, art is for exploring and experimenting and making connections.
Yeah, and communicating, like you said. I love the fact that lately, over the last 5 to 10 years, you start to hear the word creatives, which to me is more inclusive. And so when you're talking about, because people have the perception that if I can't draw very well, or I'm not working in the arts per se, that the perception that I have of what the arts is, I'm not artistic. I'm not an artist. I can't be an artist. And it's so restrictive. So you're being able to put that small a on the artist and the artistic means that it is more inclusive, because no matter how I use art to communicate, I'm an artist. I am a creator. I am a creative, which is really amazing.
Yeah, and there are so many sides to it. I have students who, they cannot draw to save their lives, and neither can I. Like, it just simply, it's not my strength. It's not my interest. I'm more of a three-dimensional person. I like constructing and building. My focus at university was in pottery and three-dimensional form and things. I'm very messy. My creations never, I'm not a planner. I'm a very reactionary, responding kind of a person. And there are some students in the class at such a young age where their strength is in interpreting art or seeing connections and, making sure that you hear them and celebrate how ingenious their thoughts are. And sharing with the students that, this person who you may not view as skilled and having a strength in art, really is as equally valuable. And they may actually, over the course of their lifetime, develop a connection with the arts even stronger than the kids who are very technically skilled at drawing. So I'm always fighting against that.
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you are. We have an advocate in the room. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Well, the kids laugh because I always say, I hate drawing. And they're, Miss Lise, how can you be an art teacher and hate drawing? And it's good. It's hard. And, it's a certain person who, it's like the people who are accomplished pianists. They're accomplished because they practice and it's their thing.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. Oh, this has been so amazing, Lise. I hate for it to end. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about or any other advice that you'd like to give our listeners before we finish up?
Well, there was one question that I had for you, and it's about the name of the podcast being Journeys to Learning. Journeys Towards Belonging. And I thought a journey has an end. And when you're talking about, when it comes to belonging, on a journey to belonging, do you feel that there is an end destination? Or is the journey to belonging really just a series of stops along the way?
That's such a great question. Yeah. You're turning the tables on me. I love it.
Yeah. So, do you see there being an end point when it comes to a journey to belonging?
No, not really, because for me, the journey is the discovery along the way. And so I think that we journey all our lives trying to discover that sense of belonging. And the older and hopefully wiser we get, the more we understand ourselves, achieve that sense of self-belonging, and are able to have those really wonderful, strong relationships with others, both professionally and personally, because we are, confident, we have self-efficacy, we know ourselves so well. And so, I look at it as a journey, and then looking back toward the end of life, whenever that is, would be, becoming a good ancestor, meaning what legacy am I leaving for the planet, for the world, for others, for my children? And what does that look like? How am I really leaving something, a footprint, a good footprint here?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thank you. That's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. How do you view it?
I think it's that same. I think what you've said really sums it up so nicely, especially the idea that at the end of this journey, you are passing on, ensuring that the future generations are able to access a sense of belonging. Is just such a nice way of summing it up. It just got me thinking when I was reflecting on the title of your podcast. I thought, wait, is there an endpoint? And Do some people, when you're younger, you have this idea that there is the ultimate goal that you're aiming for, the house with the white picket fence or what have you, or always being a traveler and being a nomad. And once you achieve that goal that you had set for yourself and you feel that you have found your place and you belong there, do you remain unmovable and stay in a place of belonging? And I wonder if people if people do actually experience that, where their sense of belonging really is fixed in place. Just more.
That is something to contemplate. Yeah. We could probably write a book together about it.
Yeah, but thank you so much for just being such a positive influencer. And just, again, provoking thinking and connecting people through their ideas and going beyond just the education realm as well, and interviewing people who are connected in different ways to the world of education.
Yeah, it's been a learning journey for me too. And so it's so kind of you and so wonderful of you to say that. And I'm so happy that we made the connection through the podcast, which is really interesting. And then for me to be able to have you on is just a joy. Lise, people want to hop off and find you after this. And of course, I'll include this in the show notes. Where are the best places to find you?
I think the easiest place is simply to find me on Twitter. My handle is @L_Farquhar_IB, which I think clearly shows that when I signed into Twitter, I really didn't understand how it worked. But it's a little bit too late to reinvent myself there. So it's a little bit of a tricky one, and hopefully you can get a visual on that, because Farquhar is not the easiest name to spell.
Well, I do want to tell you, you definitely can change it because, but the question is, do you want to? And then make sure that everybody knows about it too. So, but yeah, it actually is a good identification for you, because really the whole idea of IB is all that you're about, that whole inquiry, project, curiosity, all the things that we talked about today. So
yeah, I definitely cannot separate my professional life from my personal life. That's for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Lise. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, I don't know how long, but it felt like 15 minutes, but I got to know you so well. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, Eileen.